Homebrew creature design is a long and storied tradition. To understand it, we need to go all the way back to the very beginning, when the first primordial human said, "You know what? This horse would look badass if it had horns. No, wait, a single horn, right in the middle of its head. Yeah, that's sick as f***. The name of this pioneer of the craft? This is his story.
Right, so first things first, I'm not going to be showing my face in this video because I went and got myself all nice and sunburnt last weekend. Being Scottish and having what can only be described as a pale blue complexion, that happens quite easily. But that's okay, I doubt that's why any of you are actually here in the first place. Right, so last time we looked at some of the basic techniques that I use to make homebrew creatures. A lot of taking what's already there and tweaking, repurposing, or using it as a base layer to build out from. If you haven't seen that video, which not a lot of you have it seems, you should check that out first. We theorised about a possible way to build Godzilla into D&D, and then I built a version of the Xenomorph from Alien. Go ahead and watch that video, take a look at the creature that I built to go with it, and let me know in the comments what you think. Go on, I'll wait. I had planned to make some revisions based on your feedback for the Xenomorph, but none of you watched the frickin' video, so I'm going to skip that for now, and we'll come back to it once we've got something else to work with. Now, with all of that out of the way, we can get to the reason that you're really here, the hot tea that I spilt in the title of this video that compelled you to click. Challenge rating sucks. It does. It really does. Now, I get why it's there. There has to be some way, especially for someone new to the game, to narrow down what kinds of creatures they're going to throw at their party. In the lower levels, it's usually something like kobolds, goblins, skeletons, giant rats, and that makes sense to most of us. Most of us have at least a passing familiarity with RPGs and their tropes, so it's within our collective zeitgeist to just know that those are the low-level monsters that a party should face in the early days of their adventures. But what about after that? From levels 3 to 10, for example. What are the classic monsters a party should face then? A dragon? Well, okay, but what kind of dragon? There are more than 50 of them, all with varying power levels. Giants, orcs, owlbears, a beholder. It gets a lot fuzzier in the mid-levels. So yes, the challenge rating helps to establish a gentle curve of rising difficulty as the party levels up. But there are at least two things that really compromise how useful challenge rating actually is. First, they're wildly inaccurate. Here's an example. Let's look at challenge rating 4. Okay, just a random challenge rating. According to the Dungeon Master's Guide, the monster's final challenge rating is the average of its defensive and offensive challenge ratings. Round the average up or down to the nearest challenge rating to determine your monster's final challenge rating. There's a lot of challenge rating. For example, if the creature's defensive challenge rating is 2 and its offensive challenge rating is 3, its final challenge rating is 3. Okay, so the challenge rating that we see is an average taken from what it calls the offensive challenge rating and the defensive challenge rating, and those are directly related to the bonus the creature has to hit and its potential damage output and its armor and health respectively. Now that seems pretty well thought out, and in general it will give you a good idea. That's how I worked out the challenge rating of the Xenomorph in the last video. But let's see it in practice. Okay, CR4 is what we're going with. So let's pick two creatures and compare them. Okay, right here we've got a Banshee and, I don't know, a Wereboar. A Banshee and a Wereboar. Okay, so we've got a spooky, screamy undead lady and a gnarly man-bear pig. I have just picked these at random, so I really don't know how well this is going to prove the point that I want to make, but it's fine. It should be fine. So we now know that the source material would have calculated the CR for these two creatures using the method that we just looked at. Now, the Dungeon Master's Guide also says, a single monster with a challenge rating equal to the adventurer's level is, by itself, a fair challenge for a group of 4 characters. If the monster is meant to be fought in pairs or groups, its expected challenge rating should be lower than the party's level. So, taking the simplest of scenarios, there are 4 adventurers, all level 4, standing in a field somewhere, and suddenly a Banshee shows up. The first thing that happens is the Banshee uses its horrifying visage ability and everyone rolls to see if they are frightened of it. DC 13, Wisdom save. The result of that roll is going to determine if this is a really tough fight or not. If everyone succeeds, they'll probably pretty handily beat up the Banshee before her next turn. If everyone fails, someone is going to die. So if your party of 4 happens to be a monk, a cleric, a paladin, and a barbarian, all of whom have bonuses to wisdom saves, you're almost certainly going to be fine here. But if you've got a rogue, a bard, a fighter, and a wizard, you're going to have a hard time. We might want to assume that we have a fairly mixed group, so easily 2 save and 2 might fail. Still working on sort of averages here, as the DMG suggests. So the fight with the Banshee in this case is going to be determined pretty much in that first action. Now let's look at the Wereboar. In the same featureless field, 4 adventurers are standing around and a Wereboar appears and attacks them. There's no save at the top of the fight, it can't do any fancy magic-y things, so it'll just have to pick a target and bash them. It's got +5 to hit compared to the Banshee's +4. So it picks a target, smacks them with its maul, and then gores them with its tusks. It can do a fair amount of damage in a couple of hits, and it has a chance to infect its target with lycanthropy, which is cool but doesn't in any way affect its difficulty. Being generous, the Wereboar might take down a party member in the first round. Then the other 3 rush in and attack it. It has low AC but relatively high HP, so they probably beat it up quite a bit, but again it depends on a number of factors. Did the Wereboar target a squishy member of the party? Or did it run straight at the big beefy barbarian? The Wereboar is horrible at basically every saving throw, so if someone gets a charm or a command on it, it's pretty much toast. The Banshee is going to be real trouble for your party, based on almost entirely if its first couple of abilities succeed. The Wereboar doesn't have the same burst potential, but it might outlast you if you're unlucky enough not to have a party member with some crowd control. They both have the potential to kill someone, or even everyone, but they have very different approaches, even in a basic straight-up fight in the middle of a featureless field, as we've said. Success or failure against them depends on very different variables. But we never really face an enemy in the middle of a featureless field. That just doesn't naturally happen in our games very often. The Banshee, for example, could be stalking the halls of an abandoned tower waiting to strike the party in a vulnerable moment, such as when they rest. It can move through walls and it can sense the presence of any living creature within 5 miles. It makes an excellent candidate for an ambush encounter. This could potentially make the fight much more difficult, especially if it's been following the party for a long time waiting for them to drop their guard. The Wereboar is a shape changer. It can look like just some regular guy, or a boar. Your party could be tricked into thinking that this sort of gruff hunter character is going to lead them through the forest, and maybe they take your rogue off to scout ahead and show them something, but instead they just end up attacking them and leaving them for dead. There are countless ways that the particular scenario of your game can drastically affect the difficulty of an encounter. Okay, so onto the second thing that makes CR completely useless. We've sort of already started talking about it, but they're very, very delicate. Any small change you make to the scenario will have an impact on the challenge. Kobolds are perhaps the best example of this. They are challenge rating 1/8, which means that, according to the DMG, about 8 of these creatures should present a fair challenge to 4 level 1 characters. But here, just listen to this. Here are some things about kobolds that we are told in their description in 5th edition. Physically weak, they are easy prey for predators. This vulnerability forces them to band together. Their superior numbers can win battles against powerful adversaries, but often with massive casualties on the kobold side. Kobolds make up for their physical ineptitude with a cleverness for trap making and tunneling. Their lairs consist of low tunnels through which they move easily but which hinder larger humanoids. Kobolds also riddle their lairs with traps. Kobolds hate gnomes and pranks of any kind. A few kobolds are born with leathery wings and can fly. They like to lurk on high ledges and drop rocks on passers-by. Oh, that rhymed. So to sum up, where there's one kobold, there are usually a lot more. They make traps and their lairs are difficult to maneuver for larger creatures. They hate gnomes and tricks or pranks, and some of them can fly. So we can actually discount the fact that some of them can fly because there is a separate stat block for those creatures and they do have a slightly higher CR. But take any of those other things mentioned about kobolds and actually implement them in your game, and I guarantee you someone is dying. Why would there be 8 kobolds? Maybe they're scouting or hunting, but there's likely a lot more lurking around. Like, A lot more. If your party somehow finds themselves in a kobold lair, there are going to be traps. Not only that, but they're going to be particularly nasty traps. Clay pots containing slimes being lobbed at them, jars of bees, pits of scorpions, plus the kobolds. That's almost certain death, and I'm not talking about just for a level 1 party either. Oh, your party has a gnome? Well, guess who the kobolds are targeting above all else? Better hope that gnome's not your healer or your main damage dealer. The factors that influence the calculation of CR don't and really can't account for any kind of creative interpretation of the creatures by the DM, or any kind of environmental features, or really any deviation from the vanilla fight in a field scenario. And that is why it is a garbage stat. So what do we do? If there's no way to tell how difficult the fight is going to be before we're in it, what options do we have to make sure that we don't either run the risk of killing the party in every fight, or having the enemy pose no threat at all, or worst of all, having every fight be a boring mathematical exercise of I hit you hit me, I hit you hit me, I hit you hit me, oh, one of us is dead. Well, don't you worry, because I've got some tricks to share. First of all, even though, yes, it is a garbage stat, challenge rating can still serve a purpose. If your party is level 3, you're probably not going to throw a beholder at them, for instance. It gives you a rough ballpark to work with, but what I'm saying is do not trust it to balance your fights for you. There are a lot of ways to make your encounters with creatures either easier or harder on the fly, depending on what you need in the moment. Let's start with making things harder. I actually find this comes up a lot more than cases where I need to make a fight easier. Of course, you can just keep adding more health to your monster, or bump up its armor class. That's a nice, easy thing to do, but it's not very inventive, and it doesn't actually make as much of a difference as you'd expect, except to make the fight last longer. Here's what I would do instead. Use minions. Minion creatures are one of my favourite homebrew rules to add in my games. And I'm not talking about those little yellow guys. Yeah, not them. That's not what we're talking about. Ugh. A minion can be any creature in theory, but usually something with a low CR. Around or below CR1 I find works best. They act in the same way as the normal creature, except for just a few adjustments. They have 1 HP. Any successful attack will kill them. They cannot multi-attack. Even if they normally have that ability, they cannot multi-attack if they are a minion. They always do their average damage when they hit. This just helps you to keep things quick by not having to roll dice for their damage. They all act on the same turn. Now this is again just for ease of management, but what actually you can do is have several waves of minions. So for example, you could have a wave of minions that attacks on initiative 10, but as the fight progresses and the minions get whittled down, you might decide that there's a second wave that appears and they attack on initiative 14. There are a few different variations of the implementation of minions, but this is the setup that I use. Minions are a great way to combat one of the most severe problems with challenge rating, and that is a phrase you might have heard of before, action economy. It's happened to all of us. We've set up a super cool villain for the party to fight, the apprehension has built up over several sessions to get to this point, and the time has finally come for the big showdown. At which point your villain does like one thing, and then your party promptly murders them. That's it. Dunzo. This is because of the way action economy works in the game. For every turn your villain takes, there are 4 or 5 or 6 turns taken by your players depending on how many of them there are. This means that there are several chances for your players to have a big impact on the fight, but only one for your villain. In most cases, this means that your party will absolutely steamroll a single enemy. Minions help to combat this by encouraging the party to spread their focus across several different targets and giving the enemy characters in the fight more actions in the turn order. So the idea with minions is that you can throw in pretty much an endless number of them. If the party is having too easy a time with the fight, add another wave of minions. Start with 1 minion for each party member and then turn it up as you need to. Once the main villain falls, the minions can continue to fight, or some of them might flee in terror, or they might just all do the thing that happens in literally every superhero movie, where they just conveniently die. Another way to give your monsters an edge, particularly if they are intended as a bigger threat, is to give them legendary actions. Even just giving a creature 1 legendary action to take each turn can make a big difference. You can also throw in legendary resistance if you want. Another popular homebrew rule you could use is the bloodied condition, When the enemy has been reduced to half of its total health, you announce that the enemy is now bloodied. Think of this as like the second phase of a boss fight in a game like Dark Souls. In this weakened state, the enemy might gain access to some new features and abilities and become much more dangerous. This could also make for a good triggering point for you to make some changes if it's been too easy up until this point. You could introduce your minions or your legendary features here. And one last thing to consider is something I've talked about before in my video on quests. Use the environment to create hazards and pressures in the encounter besides the obvious task of dealing with the enemy. Introduce a timed element where the battleground will become more and more dangerous, or give the enemy some extra defense or power as long as they remain within range of some sort of artifact that the party could move or destroy. In the case where you want to make a fight easier, there are a lot of viable ways. If the monster had followers or minions, have some of them run away. You could remove the monster's resistance to certain damage types, or even give them a vulnerability. You can use the bloodied condition in this way as well. When the creature becomes bloodied, have them sustain an injury that prevents them from using certain abilities, or reduces their damage output, or even hobbles their movement in some way. It is actually much easier to reduce the difficulty of a fight when you need to, because all that you need to do is give your monster a reason to fail and then make it happen. This could be anything from receiving a message that calls it away in the middle of the fight, to teleporting away or fleeing after a successful takedown of a party member, taunting the party to give chase if they dare. Or you could simply fudge some rolls. There really isn't any limit to how much you can buff or nerf an enemy with these methods, and it can be a great way to change up the formula. Instead of goblins, you could have your low-level party fight a group of hill giants who have been ravaged by some sort of sickness that has weakened them and driven them out of the hills to find easy prey. Or you could have your level 14 party face off against a tribe of Kuatoa who have been granted special powers by their newly awakened god, or a band of renegade fairies who have stolen the crown of a legendary lich and have command of the dead. Let me know if you come up with any interesting encounters or creatures that use their features in a way we might not normally expect. I love that stuff, and I'm always looking for more ways to sort of shake up the meta a bit. I said in my last video that I would talk about armor class and hit points as well this time, but I think that will pair better with my plan for the xenomorph. So go and watch my last video and leave a comment if you have any thoughts about it. I will then come back and review the stats of the xenomorph I made, and we'll talk about those other things then. Next time, I think I'm going to do another deep dive video, this time an introduction to world building. This is something I've been quite excited to talk to you guys about for a while, and there's a lot to cover, so if there's anything related to world building that you'd like to know about specifically, let me know in the comments and I'll try and make sure to get to it. We might also have friend of the channel Domino44 back in to talk about this, which you guys seemed to really respond to last time. Definitely also check out the video I made with her on map making if you haven't already. You probably have, it's my most popular video by far. Anyway, thank you all so much for watching, and until next time, stay safe and happy adventuring. See ya. Oh, God damn it. Okay. Alright, I've got my Dungeon Master's Guide here. If you're wondering why I sound like I'm really tired, it's because I've just had to crawl into this little space that I've made to record audio, which hopefully will make it sound a lot nicer than it usually does for you guys.